Okay, so hello, I'm Rachel Harris. I teach and work in Switzerland, so we will start on time. And we will definitely finish on time, if not before, so you can all go for lunch. So I've been a teacher of English as a foreign language for many, many years, and I am presently a special education needs coordinator in a primary school. But I've also worked with special education needs for adults, for teens, etc. And what I'd like to give you today are the tips that I wish I'd had when I started teaching. Because we'll always be told the best way to deal with all of your students is to get to know all of your students and what they need. And that is brilliant, that is perfect, but it's absolutely no help when you walk into a classroom of 30 kids, adults, whoever, who you've never met at the start of a school year, or you're replacing a colleague, or any other scenario. So what I'm going to suggest now are things that will help all of your students, not just students who may or may not be neurodiverse for a variety of reasons, but all of your students. So everything we look at, you can look at and you can do in your classroom with everyone, in any age group, any situation. Before we start, I'd like to have a little look. I'm not going to give definitions, and I'm not going to give you a list of all the different types of neurodiversity, which could be dyslexia, ADHD, etc. But I would like you to look at the different ways these things can show up in people's lives. So first of all, with your neighbour, just have a little think about which of these do you think could be linked to various neurodiversity. Find a friend and have a chat. Okay, I'll put you out your misery. So put up your hand if you think one of them could be linked to neurodiversity. Just one. If you think two of them, three of them, 4, 5, 6. No. Ha! Just before I go any further, at the end there will be a link to my LinkedIn account. If you want the slides, you can send me a message and I'll send them. But they are very neuro-friendly, I hope, and very simple, mainly because I'm rubbish at tech. So they don't shine about, they don't do anything clever, they're just there, okay? So there's nothing big and clever about them. So, first of all, interrupting in class is a sign of difficulties with inhibition, and that is a sign of various neurodiversities, perhaps ADHD, but not just, and we'll talk about that in a little while. Fine motor skills, so that can include doing up shoelaces, buttons, etc., and then later on holding a pen, can be a sign of dyslexia and other specific educational needs. But again, I'd like to point out that it can be, and it doesn't mean it will be. And just because a child of a specific age is not doing what they should, be it doing up shoelaces or reading or writing or sitting still, does not mean that they have a specific educational need or not. But one of the signs, there has been a link with early motor skill difficulties and going on to be dyslexic. Impulsive buying, any addiction, not any addictions, but addictive behavior, etc., has also been linked to ADHD. So that could be a sign of that for number 3. One of the things we're going to look at just in the next slide is executive functions. And organisation is one of the main executive functions that I find that my learners with specific needs definitely have difficulties with. And it's also one of the things that teachers have difficulties with. Often we are told, so this student has dyslexia, and we think about putting things into place to support their reading, to support their writing, etc. And then they're 5 minutes late to class, and we tell them off because you should know where we are, we've been here since September. But organisation is also something that these people may have trouble with, as we all do, and so you should bear that in mind. Jobs. So, entrepreneur, I think about 50% of entrepreneurs who have been tested in various surveys have been shown to have ADHD. There are other jobs that are often linked to ADHD, and you probably know one of them. You may be one of them, and if not in your staff room, there will probably be somebody, because teaching is one of the jobs that is linked to having ADHD. Just like you'd have a think about your typical week, what you've done, where you've run from and to, everything you've forgotten in the wrong room at the wrong time, and there you go. Other job links include, so you may have heard there's a neuro myth about NASA looking for people with dyslexia. There's not actually any proof of that, but GCHQ, which is where James Bond works, the British spy organisations, MI5 and MI6, actively research people with dyslexia. And about 50% of their staff have dyslexia, because of their difference in cognitive functions and especially problem solving. And the only one of these that has not been scientifically linked to learning differences is being left-handed. And that is just anecdotal evidence. There's no evidence that being left-handed has any link to specific educational needs. So I talked a little bit about executive functions, and I'd like you to have a look at this now, because I think it's a good way to go into how you can support all your learners in the classroom, rather than I think they may have dyslexia or they may have dyscalculia or etc., to actually look at how I can support everybody if they have different executive functional needs. So I mentioned inhibition. So you could see how this can show up in your classroom. This can be blurting out the answer. This can be when you do that classic pair work and you say, don't throw your neighbour, and they're already blah, things like that. So many people will have differences in inhibition, and you should take that into account. And thanks, that's brilliant that you've blurted out that answer, but just keep it to yourself or note it down and you tell me later. Attention, and that's not just students with attention differences. We also need to think about cognitive load, because it's definitely a circle. If you have a student who has difficulty in reading and writing in your classroom, they are going to find it hard. They are making more of an effort to concentrate in your class than other students. And I don't know about you after 2 full days of conference, but concentration is hard, it's a muscle, and it wears down. So your students are going to find it harder to concentrate and give you their attention for the whole lesson, especially if it's after PE, if it's at the end of the week, if it's on a long day, or if, the worst case scenario, you teach in primary and it's been a rainy day and they've been in the classroom all day. Okay? The same can be said for working memory, so especially short-term working memory. So obviously, think about everything we do. Instructions. One of the things I would love would be a workshop on how to give instructions that work. I've tried everything. Short ones, long ones, on the board, miming it, students reading them out, and there's always one of my students who, after my beautiful presentation, will go, "What do we do?" Okay? Or turn to their neighbour and go, "What do we do?" So if you have any tips, please let me know. But instructions definitely rely on short-term memory. And that's going to be a problem for many of your students. Also, many of the activities we do. You know, I have brilliant games that I use with my students where I go round and I borrow your pen and your ruler and your pencil case, and I put them all in my bag, and we're going to practice the possessive S and classroom vocab, and what has Mrs. Harris got in her bag? Now, of course, some students are going to know all the grammar and the words, etc., but they're not going to remember what you took. So we need to think about ways we can support those, because otherwise all these fun games and activities we have are not fun, and definitely not games for some of our learners. I mentioned cognitive flexibility, and in a couple of seconds I'll show you a slide so that you know exactly what I mean. And I've also talked about organisation. So organisation is not just timetable, being in the right place at the right time. It's having the right book, it's having the right material. We all teach in different situations, but if, as mentioned in Uruguay, you have your laptop, I know where I work, we use Google Classrooms, anything you can get online is going to help your learners because they can access it. And if you do have access to the textbook online and they've got a paper textbook, then why not have the cupboard? The cupboard is a brilliant technique for helping your students. In the cupboard, you place a couple of textbooks, a couple of workbooks, and a pencil case. So they can just come in and take it. And again, I haven't mentioned it here, but one of the things we'll be coming back to again and again and again is self-esteem. When you've arrived in the wrong classroom, you've got the wrong stuff, you've forgotten your pen again. Here, I'm not surprised. And you have that day after day, and not just in your English classroom, but in your job, getting the wrong bus to school or work, etc. Think about how that can feel. So if you can just lighten that load of, there's the cupboard, help yourself, for all of your students, it's one less thing, isn't it? And as we all know, if we've had teenage sons, that saying, don't forget your pen, or, oh, that'll teach you, next time you won't leave your wallet at home when you go away for the whole week, will make absolutely no difference. They'll still be on the phone asking for money. Different story. And problem solving, which is linked to all of these, and just a different way to see the world. And that's actually brilliant. And it's one of the things that is really useful in your group activities. I mean, one of the things I try to do is have somebody neurodiverse in each group activity, because you know they are going to find an amazing solution or a different way of looking at something, as you can see here. So this was a listening comprehension we did a few years ago, and there were various little phrases such as draw a car, draw a man next to the car, etc., like we see in some of the exam suites as well. And this is what one student did, and it really it piqued my interest for two reasons. First of all, because this is what the student did, and secondly, my colleague marked it wrong. So, as I mentioned, the instructions were things like draw a car, draw a man. What do you think the instructions were here? Draw a tree, and then draw a bigger one next to it. Draw a tree, and draw a bigger one next to it. I think this is brilliant. This kid is going to discover God knows what. It'll be amazing, okay? But two things, and remember the second thing I told you was my colleague marked this wrong. And I said to her, but A, it's not wrong, because this is a tree with a bigger one next to it. But also, give these people a bit of a break, for goodness sake, really. A lot of the time I'm working with teachers, we're working on phonics, and I'll hear the teacher say, okay, what rhymes with cop? And the kid will say, bot. And the teacher's like, no, that doesn't rhyme. At least say, yes, the O sound is the same, there's an art there, we could make it rhyme even more if. Try and have a yes and rather than a no but approach to everything, is one of my mottos. So, remember this is a workshop. I learned from Gabby earlier, and I'm not going to make you move, I'm not going to put you into groups, and I'm not going to make you shuffle around or anything. That put me off that for life. However, I would like you to work in groups of whoever you feel comfortable working with. Make a new friend or don't. Work in 3s or 4s. Normally I'd say no to 4s because one of you will not be doing any work, but okay. And what I'd like you to do, I'm splitting up my instructions to make them easier to understand. So the first instruction is, I would like you and your group to make a list of the 6 most common classroom activities that you do in your classes. So this could be Murphy exercises, but I'm sure there are other things you do. So think of, I don't know, games, activities, dictation, okay? 6 things that you do pretty regularly. Okay. So I realise this has now become a swap shop of brilliant things I do in the classroom, and you'd probably be much more interested in carrying on with that and learning from your neighbour, and you'd probably learn more from your neighbour. But have you got a list of sort of 6 classroom activities? You now have 30 seconds to get a list of 6 classroom activities that you have in common. Six. Yeah. Have you got a list of 6 classroom activities? You've got 30 seconds. Do it now, quick. Even if you don't like them, even if they're rubbish, even if you don't actually do them, have you got a list of 6 activities? Okay. Obviously, I'm going to give you all the answers anyway. So, and also just to save your battery, don't bother looking on ChatGPT, because that's what I did. And this is what ChatGPT says are the most common activities in an ELT classroom. I was surprised about the first one. I don't know if you're all familiar with the term dictogloss, but it's the idea of doing a kind of dictation where you're going to read a text but at quite a high speed 2 or 3 times, and then get your students to work together, noting keywords, etc., and then get them to try and reconstruct. So the idea is not to write down exactly the same thing, but for them to use their grammatical knowledge and vocab and etc., syntax, to produce a correct text with the same information. Okay, so it's a kind of simplified dictation. Simplified. Find someone who, especially at the beginning of the year, starter, etc., different information. The classic, done all this, then the exercise at the end of the unit, or the extra exercise from the Bible of exercises, etc. Reading aloud, reading comprehensions, and listening comprehensions. And so one of the things we forget is students who find reading comprehensions are probably also going to find listening comprehensions challenging for exactly the same reasons. Because it's using short-term memory, because of cognitive overload, because of having to remember the questions, etc. Role plays, you're the waiter, you're the client, and oral presentations. Did you have any of those? Are there any that I have missed that you think are essential that are not there? Yes, what? Games. Okay, dice, card games. Okay. Okay. So, remember the work in, you can use your own in a minute anyway. So, the work in workshop. Your task now is, in your new friend group, you are going to choose one activity. So it could be one of these, or it could be something that you do. And we're going to go back and look at the executive functions list. And I want you to look at 2 things. I want you to look at, and this is where you will have to listen, because I'm afraid I've not written down the instructions. You're going to choose your activity. You're going to look at the executive function list and think of why this activity could be a challenge to students in your classroom. And then you're going to look at how can you get round that challenge, how can you support them, how could you scaffold that activity. So if you remember my example earlier with my game, where I've taken your pen and I've taken your pencil case, etc., and put them in my bag, what I could do is I could write the number of articles that are in the bag on the board. That would help you. I could write the first letter of the person's name and of the object. So this is Rom's pen, R-P. When I'm doing the activity, I could take Rom's pen and add something to help you remember. So look, this is Rom's red pen. So make a link with it. So those are ways that I could scaffold and support that activity to make it easier and less cognitively challenging. Okay? So you're going to choose an activity. You're going to look at the challenges in relation to our executive functions. Is this activity going to require too much attention? Is it going to work hard on short-term memory? Are we asking students to problem solve in one particular way? Is there only one answer? And in which case, how can we get around that? Does it require lots of different organization skills, going onto Google Classroom, finding this, finding that, doing that? And how can you change that activity? And I will give you 5 minutes with your partner, with your group, to look at that now. Okay? Okay. So yet again, I realise the folly of asking teachers to start talking to each other. So obviously, ideally, I would now sort of shuffle you all up and we could all share ideas, etc. But as I learnt this morning, that might not work. So what we will do instead is I will have a look at these and give you some of my ideas, and you will butt in and add your own. And then, if you chose a different activity, and I hope you did, your games, etc., then I'd just like everybody who is comfortable doing so, if they could just stand up and give me one idea. Okay? But don't worry, I'll start. So, when I do dictaglosses with my students, and actually when I do a lot of activities, I always have a menu. We have a menu on the board. So starter is find 5 words. Note them down. The first course may include write 1 phrase. It may include write 6 verbs. It may be find 4 verbs and write them in the correct tense. Dessert could be draw a picture that this text represents, or make a poster, or choose, is this text a warning, a description, is it fiction, is it non-fiction, and how do you know? And those are my questions. And because I've thought my questions through, and they work for lots of activities and texts, they are laminated on the wall. So have a look at the text poster and choose what you're going to do with this dictagloss, this small text that I'm about to read you. Okay, so that's one way I can support my learners. Another, and the same for all your activities, is of course, think about your groups. Who do you want in your groups? For this activity, you'll want somebody who perhaps is good at spelling or knows how to use a dictionary, if that's what you're going to be looking at. So, who here thinks they're good at spelling, wants to be the dictionary for a group? You stand up. Who is going to be the grammar for a group? You stand up, and you go and stand with the dictionary of your choice. Who of you are brilliant at thinking of ideas and working things out? You go and stand, and therefore you can make your groups like that, if your students are happy to do so. With an activity like this, the first thing I do is actually read them the text before they choose their groups or their options, so that they know what they're letting themselves in for. Did anybody choose dictagloss? No? Any other ideas you'd like to throw out there now? No? Okay, we'll move on. So find someone who activities. First thing, and this goes with group work as well, is think about students who don't want to find anybody, who don't want to work with anybody else. I saw this in some of your faces when I said, go find a friend and work with them. You're like, oh God, not again. Really, I am just socialed out after these 3 days, so no, I don't want to do that. So, it could be find a friend, or it could be sit in your seat, don't move, and write the name of somebody you know who likes football, plays tennis, does these things, in or inside the classroom. Or it could be look around the people in the classroom and think, who do you think likes these activities? Or do you think your teacher likes these activities? Yes, no. It doesn't always have to be work with someone else. Pair works don't have to be work with someone else either. You can give an information gap and say, complete with what you know, and then research the answers. It's what we do when we need something. When I'm looking at some information I need to complete my talk, I don't go and find someone who, I go and ask ChatGPT. So why can't the students as well? Okay. Did anybody have any other suggestions or ideas for pair works? Find someone whose activities? Yes. Yes. That's a very good point. Did everybody hear that? With all these talking activities, do think about the noise level, which is not easy for all of us to concentrate when we're working as well. And think about how you can balance that. And we have to remember, this is where we have to remember all our students in the classroom. And those that need or want to work in silence or with as quiet as possible have that right too. Practically, in our classroom, we're very lucky. We've got headphones. So when students want to work with headphones, they can. And that's also a way of them showing that they don't want to participate in a group activity. If they sit at the front with their headphones on, you pretty much guess they're not going to want to talk to someone else. So that's also something you can think about in terms of equipment. Gabby gave us some pretty good ideas about changing our grammar exercises, but I think we all agree they're pretty turgid as they are, and there's quite a lot of reading. And you also need to think about, for us it's obvious, but when we have a text and then a word in brackets, and we have to complete it, I often have students who say, so when it says, I play tennis, well, the answer's there, so what do I do? And it makes no sense for the phrase to afterwards read, I play tennis. Which if you read the phrase, that is what it will say. So would it not make more sense to have a I tennis and maybe to have cut out words, play, etc.? Can you cut out some S's to add on to them? Or can you write the verbs they can use on the board and then just have them complete them? It doesn't have to all be tech, it doesn't have to be you cutting out bits of paper all the time, but there are often easy ways around these things because for us it's obvious, but they don't make sense, a lot of these phrases at the end. They were ambulance, blah, 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 and then at the end you've got 4 words in a bracket, and that's very complicated, in fact, if you don't know what you're doing. And again, why should they know what they're doing, and how long do you want to spend in your classroom teaching students how to jump through grammar hoops, which will not be useful in their real world? Or it could be, here's a verb, play, make a sentence with it, and accept any correct sentence. Anything else for grammar? If you have a brilliant, even not brilliant, if you have an idea, please share it with us, because I don't know about you, but when I go to conferences, most of the best things I come away with is what somebody sitting next to me said during the talk. Obviously, it can be really challenging if you go around asking students to read out loud and they're not comfortable doing it. However, I have noticed that a lot of my students who have dyslexia like reading out loud and want to read out loud in class. So, here's a text. Would you like me to read it to you? Would you like to take it in turns reading this morning? Would you like to read it in silence? Would you really like to read it in silence with your headphones on while the rest of us take it in turns? How do you feel about that? And then, of course, use the students who would like to read out loud, even though it's really tempting in a class of teens, and I know you're not listening, so I'm going to go, thank you, can you continue, please? Okay, which is really effective for making everybody really stressed, and never in the history of teaching has made that person find where we are in the text. Okay? And even if they follow along with their finger, they're still inside their head, their little monkey is going, humiliation, 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 she hates me, and they're still not concentrating on the text. So as tempting as it is, it doesn't work from a learning point of view anyway. It might keep them quiet, but that's it. Okay? So, and again, think about why we're reading aloud. And while we're talking about reading and listening comprehension, so a lot of the things that I've put into place for listening comprehension are the same with reading. And the main one is, when you have a text that is that long, and the answers are all down here, is your objective a find the answer in the haystack, or is it Do you understand? Does this question test your comprehension of the text? If it's a good reading comprehension, the question should test whether you understand the text or not, and not whether you can find in the 5 paragraphs where John went on holiday. So if it's a good reading comprehension, the simplest thing, without even talking about cutting down length or getting ChatGPT to give you different versions that will save you time, etc. The simplest thing to do is cut the text up and add the questions after every 4 or 5 lines. So you know that these questions are here. And for me, if it's a good reading comprehension, that's not cheating. That's supporting. Because like I say, it's not find a needle in a haystack. And the haystack reading, at least it doesn't move. But don't forget, your listening comprehension is even harder because you're supposed to concentrate for 4 or 5 minutes with Johnny battering on about all the holidays he's been to, and then, while you're listening, try and look at the questions and try and answer them at the same time. So break it up. The listening, we're going to listen to the first 3 questions, listen, stop, here they are, have a think, go back, etc. So that's one thing you can do. The other, as I said, now ChatGPT is our friend as teachers. Let's make the most of it while we've still got jobs, okay? And use it for things like you can give everybody the same questions and have them give them texts of different levels. And again, it's a menu thing. Okay? Here are 5 texts on the same subject. How are you feeling today? Do you want level 1? Do you want level 5? Do you want to take level 2 and 4 just to see? Okay? Give them the same questions, which will have the same answers. Johnny has been to Lisbon on holiday. He went to a conference. He ate pastas donatas, and he had a brilliant time. Okay? But said in different ways. So then you can mark it. The answers will all be the same. And you can mark it together. Okay? Another activity which I do with my students very occasionally, especially if I have nothing planned for Monday because I was at a conference all weekend, is to go in with the questions. Where did Johnny go on holiday? What did he eat? What did he do? And get your students in groups to write the text. Then they've done a lovely little writing together. It's not something I've talked about here actually, but writing is something that I think we can really support as well. Writing doesn't have to be they sit there and write in silence and you sit there and watch them write in silence, which is really boring for everybody. Writing is a brilliant group activity. Okay? In your groups, you're going to take it in turns writing. One of you is going to be responsible for this, one for that, your ideas person, your management, and work together on your text. And it's very bonding, and it supports learners and uses everybody's strengths. Okay? So those are just some of the things. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to say about reading comps, listening comps, etc.? Yes. Please do. Yes. Yeah. 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 It's brilliant. That's what's brilliant about primary. They're up for anything. Yeah, which is great. then that's brilliant, because that's really helping their self-esteem, and there's always something brilliant. You know, I love the emphasis you put into it. You really made us want to listen to the story. There's always something brilliant. And of course, there's always a moment for feedback. And when a child has stood at the front and done something, you give them the positives, and then later, if you want to change something, maybe, but definitely not at that time. Which is the same with role play and oral presentations as well, I think. But yes, yeah, I think we should definitely encourage that and keep it going as long as possible. It's terrible that so many sort of teens and adults have been so traumatized in the language classroom that they're terrified of getting something wrong. Because, as I do tend to point out, you're here because you can't do it. So it's normal to get it wrong. If you could do it, there'd be no point you being here. So now we just need to work with that. Yeah, it's great. But like I say to my primary, if you know everything now, life is going to be so boring. So it's a similar thing with oral work as well, and again we forget that. So I'm sure you know now, and you probably knew before, but for a student, for example, with attention difficulties or with dyslexia, we might think dyslexia is reading and writing, and then think, okay, so to help this student, we're going to do lots of oral presentations. But a lot of differences can be organising the thoughts and what you want to say in your brain so that it comes out. And for some students with ADHD, this might mean they have so many things they want to say that blah, comes out sort of looking like a Jackson Pollock tableau. And so we need to help our students organise their thoughts, and we need to help them scaffold that, whether that's with role plays or oral presentations, for example. Give them mind maps. How are we're going to do our oral presentation on dogs. So we're going to talk about different breeds, size, etc. and get them to fill in their mind map, and then each bubble is going to be a paragraph or a phrase that you're going to say. Or it could be really scaffolding. It could be giving them the introduction and then giving them the start to each phrase. So dogs are found in many places in the world. They have been man's best friend for 3 billion years, etc. And then dogs are found in country. Dogs can be colour, size, description. I chose dogs because. And some people worry about giving too much scaffolding, but it depends on what you want them to take away. If you give them the first introductory paragraph, you might think that's an awful lot. But not only are you giving vocab, etc., but you're also giving important information on what kind of language you're expecting. Have you got a passive phrase in there? Have you written in the present? Have you written in the past? And read through it together and make it explicit. Look at the kind of language I've used here. Look at how this is in the past because we're narrating a story, etc. And that will give them what they need to go on. Okay? And when they're giving oral presentations, I always encourage my students, like me today, to bring their notes and use their notes and not leave their notes in their hotel room. Okay? Because it will give them confidence, they will have their little mind map ideas in front of them, and it is something so they don't rabbit on like I do. Just before we move on, has anybody got anything that they shared that they would like to share with everybody else? Yes, please do. Yes, of course, yeah. Yes, when we do oral presentations with my older students, I've always given them the choice. You can present in class or you can record it at home. Afterwards, it does depend on the situation, because if you're teaching business students and they will be expected to give presentations to groups in English, then you need to support and help them to be able to do that. And by recording yourself in your broom cupboard at home all the time, that's not going to help you give a presentation in English to people. And it's the same when preparing for exams, etc. You need to look at what they're going to be asked to do and then help them be able to do that in a positive way in the classroom. Because we can scaffold and put lots of things into place, but then if afterwards they're going to have to do other things, then that's not necessarily helping. But definitely, or for a bit of starter, one thing I've done is I've always got them to practice at home and record it, and then if on the day I can't do it, doesn't matter, you've got your practice version, give me that. Okay? The essential takeaways, what I have in my bag wherever I go. Blue tack is the best and the cheapest fidget toy that exists. It doesn't bounce across the room, it doesn't clack, it doesn't make a noise when you drop it. You've got it, you can make nice little things with it, it's dead easy, and you can also use it for things like keeping the paper in place. When we're writing, or when we've got students writing, often I see some teachers, I've had colleagues who tell their students off because the paper is not like this on the page, on the table, okay? Where your paper is comfortable, I'd like you all now to imagine you have your desk in front of you. You can see your desk, okay? I'd like you all to put your arms on your desk. Okay, just put your hands on your desk for a minute. Okay. If you are right-handed, I'll turn round because if you're like me, you'll be really bad at this. You want to see me in yoga. If you are right-handed, your left arm is parallel to the top of where the page should be. So my page, when I'm writing, I'm comfortable with my paper like that. If you are left-handed, your page should be like parallel to where you have just put your arm. Where you put your arm is where you are comfortable in your classroom at your desk. And that's where your page should be facing. Not like that. And you may find it useful to have a little bit of blue tack just to keep your page from not moving, especially if you're going to be knocking over your pencil case and everything else on the floor and picking up books. It's just one less thing to think about. So here's your blue tack, and if you want, you can use it to put your paper down. Paper there. Okay? So that's why I have blue tack. Obviously, maybe I've got my... There you go. I told you they were my essentials. And I do believe I have my cardboard mirrors, windows. Maybe not. I think I've given them away. My cardboard window is 2 pieces of cards that look like that. And then they go like that. And with paper clips, they stick together. And you can put them on the book to look at whatever size you want them to be, to look at what we are looking at now. So you don't have to look at the rest of the book. And this is what we're reading, and this is what we're following. So, especially on these textbooks where they have everything, flashing lights, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and all these columns and everything, which are just awful. I'm sorry, they may look wonderful to some people, but really complete overload for me. Okay, so your cardboard windows will help you with that as well. And of course, then you do have loads of overlays and things like that of various colours, which you may see. So you may have seen like whole page ones or little rulers. These are just the same as the cardboard windows because you can just put them on what we're looking at. And studies have shown that all readers read more quickly with a coloured overlay. Okay. Studies have not shown necessarily that students with dyslexia read more quickly, but actually everybody does. And its results are sort of not quite sure. And also we're not sure what colours work for who. But they're fun to have. You can have them in the cupboard along with the blue tack and the pencil case, and anyone who wants to go and take one can. So I always find they're really useful to have. And also, I find it a way of showing my students and bringing up the subject of specific needs. So when I go into a classroom, I'll say some of you may realise that you read better with these. Some of you who may have difficulty doing this or this may find this easier. And it's a way of bringing it up in a classroom. Ring binders, not only for organisation, but also for using them as a sloping desk. If you can have a sloping desk, that's lovely, and it's often a lot easier to write on a desk that slopes. If that's not possible, then allowing your students to write on their ring binders or on their knees or on the floor, because we're not even going to go into seating, but it's very complicated, as you may know. I don't know about you, but I'm a terrible student, and sitting there straight for hours on end when we're at conferences is really quite difficult. So think about your students. And remember as well that the student who's leant against the wall, it doesn't mean they're not concentrating, or the student that's not looking at you. Because in fact, often when you're listening, you might tend to be like this more than like that. And so the student who's actually staring at you is probably actually not concentrating at all. Okay? And we can doodle and listen at the same time. So remember that as well. The whiteboard. I was really messy, and I am really messy, full stop. And I was with my whiteboard. But then I think about all the efforts I make to try and make my textbook simpler for students to understand, and my worksheets and all that. And then I turn around and look at my whiteboard, and it's just it looks like some abstract art. So I really think it's worthwhile for your poor students, or my poor students, have to look at this to make sure you have zones for different things. Here's where we're going to put our learning objectives. Here's where the vocabulary, the new vocab is. Here's where the homework will be written. And here are the instructions that I've just written down. And again, it's not cheating after giving the instructions just to write page 25. It saves everybody's sanity, especially mine. Okay? So you've told them 20 times, and now it's just written here. And then you use a magic finger to go, or how do we say, or what is the date? There you go. Okay, magic finger. And a wiper, because when you clean your board, you might just scrub off the word. Some students will completely fixate on that little black line that's left up there. And that is all they will be able to concentrate on. And it will really upset them, and they won't be able to concentrate on the next exercise until you've done that. And as a rule of thumb, obviously we avoid copying off the board, but if we don't, then what we try and do is make it minimum just one line. So those are the essentials. Sorry, I've gone over. In class, I know you're all doing this anyway, routines, and as I hope I've told you throughout the whole of this talk, is give people a chance for success. Everybody does things brilliantly. And so I think if I could give you one thing to take away with your students is learning's hard. They're doing the best they can. Even if it doesn't look like it, if they could do better, they would. Everybody would in life. Even some politicians, perhaps. If they could do better, they would. So, at least for our students, definitely give them a break. That's my message today. If you have any questions, I'll be around for the rest of the day, and I'd love to get in touch with you and contact you. And I would love you to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, ask me any questions, tell me your stories, and I'll be more than happy to share my slides with you. Thank you. Thank you.